Blessed are the merciful, for mercy will be shown to them by you, by you. Oh, blessed are the ones who call your name, and blessed are the ones you save. Oh, you bless the pure in heart. We will see our God. We will see our God. Those who long for making peace, they will be called the children of our God. Our God. Blessed are the meek, for they receive the earth and all that's found in you. In you. Oh, blessed are the ones who call your name, and blessed are the ones you save. Oh, you bless the pure in heart. We will see our God. We will see our God. If just to know you, if just to love you, what more can I ask for? What more can I ask for? If just to know you, if just to love you, what more can I ask for? What more can I ask for? If just to know you, if just to love you, what more can I ask for? What more can I ask for? If just to know you, if just to love you, what more can I ask for? What more can I ask for? Oh, blessed are the ones who call your name, and blessed are the ones who say, oh, you bless the pure in heart. We will see our God. We will see our God. Oh, we will see our God. We will see our God. Persecuted we will stand, for our reward is heaven here and now, and yet to come.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the Sunday celebration of the First Christian Church in San Marcos, Texas. I'm Gregory Ross, Senior Pastor for our church, and we're very excited to have you be with us this morning. The First Christian Church of San Marcos, Texas exists to lead everybody into a growing relationship with Jesus Christ. And so we hope that you're with us to enjoy our praise of worship today. Be prepared for communion during a communion song in just a few minutes in our service. We'll pray. Our worship team will lead us in music. And now if you'll join with me, let's pray together. Father, we thank you so much for this day, the beginning of a new week. We thank you for the knowledge that we have and the confidence that we are not alone, but that you are with us. And though we are physically separating ourselves during this time of a pandemic for the health and safety of the people in our community, our hearts are bonded together by your spirit of love and power. And so we're very thankful to be with you and to be together today. I pray that you'll be with every person who's joining us today. May we feel close to one another because we share the same desires and values to be close to you and to love you and to love our neighbor. We ask you to be with us in our service. May we listen to your word, and may our hearts and our minds be open to the opportunities to serve people in this particular time. And now, if you will you join me with the Lord's Prayer, which is on the screen. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come. Your will be done on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever. Amen.
Let us break bread together on our knees. Let us break bread together on our knees. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me. Let us drink the cup together on our knees. Let us drink the cup together on our knees. When I fall on my knees with my face to the rising sun, oh Lord, have mercy on me.
Last Sunday, we began a new series of messages following the Sermon on the Mount series that we did through the summer months. And I'm now looking at some heroes of faith, and I'm calling the theme of this series Salt and Light, because there is a continuity between the life of Jesus and what he teaches us about how to live as people and as followers of his in the Sermon on the Mount. The continuity is that the Spirit of God, which raised Jesus from the dead, dwells within our hearts and gives us new life. That's what we're taught in the letters of Paul and others in the Christian scriptures. So Jesus, when he is going about teaching and healing, he has a gift of healing. People are drawn to him, and he listens to them, and he has compassion on the crowds. And he exhibits a level of love that these people had not experienced, particularly by people who seem to have authority or be in leadership positions before. And so his reputation grows to the point that when he goes from village to village, they line the streets, the roads where he's coming in order to be able to see him and perhaps touch him or perhaps talk to him. Jesus, as he went about, used to say to those people who were learning to trust him and to follow him, he said, "You believe in God, believe also in me." And so he was encouraging people to follow him and to follow what he was teaching them to do. And he says to these people, some of them very poor, some of them in desperate conditions, some of them sick, some of them not sure where tomorrow's food will come from to feed their children. You know what he says about them, to them and to us? He says to those people who were his disciples, his followers, "You are the salt of the earth." And he says, don't let your saltiness go away. You give zest to life. You provide a tastiness because of your hope, because of your joy, because of your courage. And he says, you are the light of the world. Don't hide your light like a lamp under a basket, but be like a city set on a hill, so that people may see your good works and give glory to God, because you illuminate life, you clarify issues, you provide inspiration and guidance. Salt of the earth, light of the world, people are the way that God continues to work among us 2,000 years later and in every society. You are that person. If you have faith in Jesus Christ, let me tell you, you probably, in your humility, don't realize how important your life is in somebody else's life. The influence you have, the salt that you provide that seasons the the life experience that they have, by giving comfort or even just by watching you and being inspired by the model of your life. Don't underestimate your words. Don't underestimate your attitude. Don't underestimate the life that you're leading. Someone is watching, and it's going to make a difference for good or not for good. And so be aware that you have a part to play in the kingdom of God and that it's very important. So you're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. We're going to be looking at others in biblical records and in historical records that were the salt of the earth and the light of the world to people. And this morning I want to look at one of those people from 4,000 years ago. His name is Joseph. I call this sermon Joseph of Egypt, so you don't think this is Mary and Joseph or some other Joseph. But this is the 11th son of Jacob, one of the sons of Israel, who had two sons who became tribes of Israel, Ephraim and Manasseh, as you may recall. Joseph, I wanted to start with Joseph. He's not a follower of Jesus. Jesus came 1,900 years into the world after Joseph had died. But Jesus is our Lord, both before his time in history and since. And here is one person of faith that I wanted to just talk about at the beginning of this series because honestly, he's my favorite person, my favorite historical character in all the pages of the Hebrew Scriptures, that we call the Old Testament. I think he's an amazing person. So Genesis, the book of Genesis, the first book of the Bible, Genesis means beginning. In the beginning, God created. And so all these things that he created. And it only takes the book of Genesis 11 chapters out of 50 to describe the creation of the world and about 5 billion years of history in the created order of things till we get to people and till we get to human beings and all of the disruption that we cause ourselves. And the first 11 chapters are prologue to the story of how Abraham came to be called by God to represent him and to be a blessing to all nations, which he is still to this day. So then you have from chapters 11 forward the story of the ancient patriarchs in the lineage of the Hebrew people. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. You begin really with the call to Abraham, and then from Abraham to Jacob. Jacob has 12 sons. His 11th son is named Joseph, and Joseph gets the major portion of the book of Genesis, beginning in chapter 37 through chapter 50 of Genesis, is the story of Joseph, and so. It's a story of a person who has been promised a relationship with his family that he doesn't get to realize for many, many years, but who never gives up hope and whose faith in God gets him through much adversity. And for that reason, I've selected as a text for this lesson about Joseph today from the Gospel of the New Testament book of James chapter 1, verses 2 through 5. And listen to what James has to say. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work, so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything. If any of you lacks wisdom, you should ask God, who gives generously to all without finding fault, and it will be given to you. So that's our text for today. And our model for that text, the one who endured many trials and learned perseverance because of his faith, is Joseph. Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, the governor of Egypt, as the story is told. Let me quickly tell you the story of Joseph. Joseph, let me preface it by this. Jacob is a patriarch. He has deep faith in God, but he is not a perfect person. There's a story in that if we wanted to talk about that. And if you want a case study of dysfunctional families, you ought to trace the story of Jacob. So he's got 4 wives. He plays favorite with his wives. Rachel's his favorite. His 11th and 12th children are born from and with Rachel, and so, of course, they're his favorite sons. Joseph was born later in Jacob's life, and in his old age, he has his last son, Benjamin, child of his old age, and so those 2 are his favorite. But Joseph is absolutely his favorite. And he doesn't spare the other sons. There's one daughter, Dinah, and there may be some others that are not named in the biblical record, other girls, but 12 boys and probably some sisters to those boys. Jacob just loves Joseph because it's his favorite wife's firstborn, and as Joseph grows up, Jacob plays favorites with Joseph. And so you see in the early years of Joseph's life, he's 17 years old. His dad gets him this ornate robe. We're not quite sure what that means. Scholars aren't exactly sure. It's sometimes called coat of many colors, but it could have been fancy embroidery, hymns and everything, and a robe probably. It set him apart from the clothes that everybody else wore because they were shepherds by trade. You don't wear fancy robes with fancy hand-stitched embroidery out to tend sheep. So Joseph is working with a couple of his brothers by one of Jacob's other wives, and they do some mischief. They do something, we're not told what it is, but Joseph runs back and tells on him. He's a tattletale to his dad. Well, that didn't endear the brothers, of course. He's 17 years old. And one of the lessons you get from reading the story of Joseph is watching him mature. He starts out maybe innocent, but definitely feeling his oats as the privileged son and sort of being his father's eyes and ears on the other brothers, which wasn't an endearing role for him to follow early in his life. He's 17 years old. His father is lavishing favors upon him and not showing that same love and concern for the other brothers who are much older than he is. So when he's 17 years old, his brothers catch him out in the field. He goes out to deliver a message or do something for his father. And they decide they're going to kill him. I mean, they're so jealous of him and so angry about him that the brothers are talking about murdering their own brother, their younger brother. And a couple of the brothers intervene on his behalf. They throw him into a cistern, which is kind of like a well, but it doesn't receive its water from above ground. It just captures water. So they've got him thrown into hopefully a shallow cistern, but he can't climb out. And there they keep and try to decide what to do with him. And as they're trying to discuss that, they're very angry with him. They see a caravan passing nearby. And so they call to them, and they make the decision that they're not going to kill their brother. He is, after all, their brother, half-brother. And so what they decide to do is sell him to somebody in the caravan into slavery. Slavery was common in those days. It's unfortunately all too common today. Human trafficking is a major problem that we should be aware of and should be dealing with. But human history involves slavery, and so Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery. Well, the caravan's headed to Egypt. They go down to Egypt and they sell Joseph as a slave to one of the captains of the Egyptian guard named Potiphar. Joseph is a decent man. despite the fact that he was a tattletale on his brothers earlier, Joseph accepts his lot in life. He accepts that he is a slave to this man Potiphar. And he's very talented and very energetic and very honest. So he soon wins Potiphar's trust and favor and trust, and Potiphar begins to prosper with Joseph's careful dealings of Potiphar's business. So he puts him pretty much in charge of everything. And while Potiphar's out being a guard for Egypt, Joseph is at home tending to business matters, and he's a young man, apparently an attractive young man, and Potiphar's wife takes an interest in him, tries to seduce him. But he is an honest person. He feels that would be a betrayal to his loyalty to his master, Potiphar, and so he refuses her approach. In anger, she accuses him of trying to attack her and seduce her. So she tells this story to Potiphar, and for whatever reason, Potiphar does not have him killed, but has him thrown into prison. Now, some scholars think Potiphar knew his wife and that she was not trustworthy. And so Potiphar, while he's angry about the story and hears the denial of Joseph, he feels that he has to accept his wife's story to some extent, but clearly does not exercise his complete authority legally to have him killed. He instead throws him into jail. Joseph has been sold into slavery and now been put into prison. While in prison, Joseph makes friends with the jailers, is a trusted person in prison because of his good heart and his honesty, and he works hard, and he's trying to be helpful to everybody. He runs into a couple of people who were imprisoned by the Pharaoh, no less, the king of Egypt, his butler and his cupbearer, and they each have troubling dreams. And Joseph is a dreamer. He had told his brothers and his parents dreams that he had that he interpreted to mean that his brothers and his mother and father, not his mother who died in childbirth, but one of the other wives of Jacob, would be serving him or bowing down to him. Well, that, of course, didn't make them any happier with him. It was part of why they were so angry with him. So he was an interpreter of dreams, and so he listened to the dream of the cupbearer and the butler, and he interpreted it for them. He said, one of you is going to be restored to the confidence of the Pharaoh, and the other one is going to be executed. And that's exactly what happened. So when the one who was exonerated was leaving, Joseph asked him to please remember him and try to help him in his situation. Well, the butler had forgotten him once he went back to service. And so not until years later does Pharaoh have some troubling dreams, and he calls upon his wise men and his diviners and all of the people that he had in his court to help him interpret his dreams, and nobody could. And the butler remembers, there was a man in prison when I was there a few years ago who interpreted the dreams of your cupbearer and me, and he was right in both counts. He may be able to help. So they summoned Joseph from prison. An interesting detail in the story is that he's given a bath and a shave and a clean suit of clothes, because he's now going to have an audience with the king, with the Pharaoh. Well, he goes to Pharaoh and he hears the dream, and he interprets the dream, and he says, we're going to have 7 years of plenty followed by 7 years of famine. And what you need to do is appoint somebody to manage the produce of Egypt for the next 7 years and build granaries and storehouses so that we are able to survive through the 7 years of famine. Somehow his interpretation of the dreams rung true to the Pharaoh himself and probably to several others who were in on his counsel, because they all seemed to agree that this seemed like a prudent plan of action. So the Pharaoh said, and I'm not just sure why he knows this, but Potiphar may have reappeared somewhere in the story and said, he managed my business affairs very well, and I've really missed him. Whatever the case may be, the Pharaoh decides to put Joseph himself in charge. This is your interpretation of the dream. I'm putting you in charge of managing the preparation in the next 7 years for the 7 years of famine. Joseph does exceedingly well. He actually strengthens the Pharaoh's authority over the land, gains much land for the state itself, and turns out to be a masterful business person. So the Pharaoh continues to have his confidence grow in Joseph, and they have 7 years of plenty, followed by the beginning of a famine. 2 years into the famine, which is worldwide, Egypt is prospering and everybody else is desperate. And people are coming to Egypt begging for help and paying for food and supplies. And included in that are some of Joseph's brothers, older brothers, sent by Jacob, his father, to come and see if they can't get some help as well, because they're in real trouble in Canaan. Now, what I haven't told in the story, for those of you who may not be familiar with the story, is that when Joseph's brothers, years before, had sold Joseph into slavery, they took his coat that they all hated, that fancy coat, and dipped it in goat's blood and took it back to their father and said, "We don't know what happened to Joseph, but does this look like his coat?" Well, of course it was. There wasn't anything like it. And their father went into deep mourning and said, "I will grieve until my own death, the loss of my son." So he was in really rough shape. Well, so he sends 10 of the brothers down to try to negotiate and get some help from Egypt. Jacob does, the father of the 12 sons. He keeps his youngest son Benjamin with him, who now is a young man, probably in his early 20s. And the 10 sons of Jacob come to ask for help. Joseph recognizes them when he finds out about it, and he hears about them. And it breaks his heart that finally, at long last, he's being reunited with his brothers. So he doesn't at first reveal himself to them. And remember, Joseph was a 17-year-old shepherd boy when they sold him into slavery. When they come back to see him, 22 years have gone by. Joseph is now 39 years old. He isn't speaking Hebrew to them. He's speaking the Egyptian language. And he is an Egyptian prince. He's a governor, the vizier of Pharaoh. And so he's the second in command in all of Egypt. He has a sharp beard. He has eyeliner on his eyes. His hair is long and swept back. And he's wearing regal clothing. He doesn't look anything like what they would have imagined, and they've assumed that their brother was probably dead years ago. So they weren't looking for Joseph, and they didn't recognize him, certainly. Joseph, however, recognizes his brothers. And there's great pain, sorrow for the long years that have gone by, joy for having gotten a chance to see his brothers again. God had promised him in a dream that one day his brothers would bow before him. 22 years later, that dream is fulfilled, but with great pain that it's taken that long. So that's the story of Joseph. Joseph, it's an emotional story, and it's a story about loss. It's a story about one misadventure after another. Joseph was alone in this world for many, many years. He was betrayed by his brothers when he was a teenager. He never got to say goodbye to his father. He was given into the hands of rough people who treated him badly. He was mistreated, sold into slavery. He seemed to be the epitome of no good deed will go unpunished. He was helpful to everybody in his young life, and yet he seemed to be continually thrust into ever deepening and worse problems. He's put in the uncomfortable and awkward position of being solicited by the wife of his master. Though he was honorable, she accused him of dishonor, and he was imprisoned. He had to languish in prison. He helped some of his fellow prisoners and was a model prisoner while he was there, but was not rewarded for that. Eventually, he is in the court of the Pharaoh, who placed such profound confidence and trust in him that he becomes second only to the Pharaoh in the land of Egypt. But all this time, 22 years have passed, and still he longs to see his father. Still he longs to see his brothers who betrayed him. He longs to see his younger brother Benjamin, who was just a very young child at that time. He was mistreated. He was punished for his good deeds. But he believed in God, and he was faithful to God. He trusted that God would fulfill his promises, and he held on to that faith throughout his life. I want to read quickly a few passages of the places where Joseph was deeply touched and emotional, because I want us to understand that this is a story about grief. And so to go, salt of the earth and light of the world, those are teachings that are found in Matthew 5:13-16, the Sermon on the Mount. Also in the Sermon on the Mount, the Beatitudes, Jesus says in Matthew 5, verse 4, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted." Joseph is an example of that, one who has mourned for most of his life, but is about to be comforted at age 39. And I wonder if we can identify with that. If some of us don't know what it feels like to be alone in the world. Some of us don't know what it feels like to long to see someone we love, a member of our family. I wonder if some of us know what it means, like Jacob, to lose a son, to lose a daughter, and to have such a difficult time with that, and to know I'm going to grieve till my own death. So in Genesis 37, verses 31-36, is told the story of how the brothers bring the blood-soaked robe of Joseph to their father, saying they don't know what happened to him. And when Jacob saw that, he screams out, "It's my son's robe." Some ferocious animals devoured him. He must have been torn to pieces. It's just a terrible image for Father Jacob. And he says, so all of his sons and daughters came to comfort him, and that's where I get the idea that more than Dinah he had more daughters than just one. But he refused to be comforted. That is, Jacob refused to be comforted. No, he said, "I'll continue to mourn till I join my son Joseph in the grave." And so his father wept for him. Now, I want to flash forward to 22 years later. Now the brothers have come to Egypt and have stood before Joseph, who recognizes them but doesn't reveal himself at first. And so Genesis 43, verses 22 through 31, I'm going to briefly paraphrase it. Joseph has his brothers invited to his house to refresh them and let them eat. And so when Joseph came home, his brothers were there, and they presented to him the gifts they'd brought into the house and bowed down before him, which was what his dream 22 years ago predicted. And he asked how they were, and then he said, here it is, Joseph talking to his brothers. They don't know who he is. "How is your aged father you told me about? Is he still living?" They replied, "Your servant, our father, is still alive and well, and they bowed down, prostrating themselves before him. And he looked about and saw his brother Benjamin, his own mother's son, and he asked, "Is this your youngest brother, the one you told me about?" And he said, "God be gracious to you, my son." Now listen to this, verse 30 of Genesis 43. Deeply moved at the sight of his brother, Joseph hurried out and looked for a place to weep. He went into his private room, and there he wept. Was this grief? No. They were tears of joy. But they also reflected the pain of the time that was spent. Have you been there? Do you know what Joseph was experiencing? He had been alone, and he had been away from the ones he loved for 22 years. And now he looks upon his younger brother, who was probably in his early 20s now, so not the little tyke that he had left behind when he himself, 17, was sold into slavery. What's it like? You know, when the pandemic began, my daughter and son-in-law have two daughters, my granddaughters, and my youngest granddaughter, as many of you members of my church know, because I talk about them a lot, I love them very much. My youngest granddaughter is immune deficient. She doesn't have an immune system. She's very susceptible to disease. So they immediately went into total quarantine, total lockdown. And it probably was at least a month or more that I hadn't seen them, because I had been out and about a little bit, and I couldn't always not be somewhere, even wearing a mask going to the grocery store. They were completely isolated in their home. I mean, they were doing things so that they would order food to be delivered at the house, and then my daughter and son-in-law would take that food into the garage where they would sanitize everything before they brought it into the house. If my son should have to go out somewhere, he would come in, take his clothes off in the garage, go immediately shower and put on clean clothes. They were being so careful, and so I didn't get to see them. They decided I might be safe. I'd tried to be careful and not be physically near anybody for over 2 weeks. And so they came to visit me at my house where nobody else was around, with no intention of us touching, but just so that I could see them. I was so excited and thrilled to see them after, 4 or 5 or 6 weeks. That's all, not 22 years, just 6 weeks. The girls wanted to hug me and I wanted to hug them, but we didn't. We just were, no, we can't do that. I remember my daughter and son-in-law went outside on the porch, and they talked and talked and talked, and I'm talking to the little girls inside, so happy to see them. So they came back in and they said, we think you're safe, and we think it's worth the risk, and so we think you're a safe person in our bubble, in our family, and so we want to be able to hug you. So I got to hug them after 6 weeks of not seeing them. And I cried. And it wasn't grief, it was joy. And I read this story of Joseph. And 7 times in the next few chapters of the book of Genesis, as he sees first his older brothers, then his younger brother Benjamin in this story, and finally his own father, he cries. And he cries at one time so loudly that though he was shut in a secret place in his own private room, his crying was so loud that the people in the palace could hear him, and they were all talking about it. His family has been reunited with him. Do you know what that means? I think many of you do. It's an amazing story, but it's a story of faith, All of the promises that God made to Joseph came true. But sometimes those promises come after a long time. How long can you wait? How long can you wait for what you pray for every day in your life? How long do you think the father waited in Jesus' story, the prodigal son, to see his son who had left him come home as he did one day? Every day, out looking, hoping, praying for him, hoping he's safe. How long can you wait? Can we endure a hardship? Do we have the faith? Can we be the salt of the earth and the light of the world that our world needs right now? People around us need examples of faith that counts it all joy when we meet any trial, knowing that the testing of our faith produces in us perseverance. And that perseverance makes us a model for others. You're somebody's inspiration. Don't be in reaction right now, folks. Be strong, be courageous. God has not left you. As the Hebrew writer writes in Hebrews chapter 12 that we read about last week, we've not yet been tested to the point of shedding our blood. Be strong. Be confident. Know that God is with you. He is with us. He has a job for us to do, and it's a very important one right now. And your words count. The people you talk to matter very much. And they're listening. They're listening to words, looking for words of hope and joy in these times. And that's our mission right now, to be the salt of the earth and the light of the world. Don't be anxious about anything, Paul tells the Philippians who are being persecuted. But in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, make your requests known to God. And the God of comfort will give us peace. In Jesus' name, amen.
Lest we